Good evening. Hello, folks. How are you? Hope you're okay out there. Welcome back to Sussex Wildlife Trust TV, broadcasting, as always, from behind the Blencoe sofa here in the front room. I hope you're okay. Hope you're all staying safe and been out enjoying the sunshine and the snow in the last week. So the Wildlife Trust has been putting these talks together to educate and inspire you since way back in November. This is our 38th webinar. Now, this one here is a talk which is organised by the Eastbourne branch of the Wildlife Trust, the Eastbourne Group. And so I'm going to welcome Janet. Janet Noss, are you there tonight?
Hello, yes, I am.
There you are. How are you, Janet? You all right?
Yes, thank you. Enjoying this cold weather. How's Eastbourne?
Is all right? Because I was about to say, is it cold over there as well? It's absolutely, it's freezing. I had to bring my chilies in tonight. There's a touch of frost out there. So, we've been doing these talks since November, and there's been all sorts of, there's been bumblebees and mammals, and there's been kelp and dung and lots of birds and all sorts. But way back in November, there were two talks all about fungi by Claire Blencoe. So we're going to. That's the last time you saw her was probably back in November. The last time I saw her was in the kitchen about 3 minutes ago. But hopefully she hasn't left me. Are you out there, Claire?
I'm here.
There she is. There she is. All right. So Claire's going to talk tonight for about between 45 minutes and an hour. We weren't too sure, were we? So we're going to talk tonight about 45 minutes an hour. And then during the talk, you can ask questions. A little Q&A function on the top or bottom of the screen somewhere. Any questions for Claire? Write them in during the talk, and I'll write them down on a bit of paper. Got my clipboard here. There we are. There's questions for Claire. There we are. I'll write them down there, and at the end, Claire's going to answer questions about 10 minutes at the end. So I'm going to disappear now. I'm going to vanish. I'm going to hand over to Janet to introduce tonight's talk.
Thanks ever so much, Michael, and to the Sussex Wildlife Trust for enabling us to have our talks online. So yes, I'm Janet Knott, the Secretary of the SWT's Eastbourne Local Group, and I'm really glad you can join us for this evening. And I hope you can join us again for our May talk by Ella Garrard and the Nature Table team for a seaside special, all about our wonderful Sussex coast wildlife. But now for tonight's talk, as long as you are well wrapped up, we've been having a great spring for getting out and spotting flowers and birds. And if you've ever wondered what wildlife we have in Sussex or what to do with your nature notes, then tonight's the night, because Claire Blencoe is here to encourage us and tell us how it's all done. So thank you. Over to Claire.
Thanks, Janet. Great introduction. Right, so moving on. Here's my talk. Excellent. The slides are moving on. So tonight I'm talking about wildlife recording, and more particularly the work of Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, which is where I work. And I've been there for about the past 6 years now. And this talk normally starts off with a bit of audience participation, which isn't going to work well over a webinar at all. But I thought if you humour me for a minute, I just want you to take a moment to look at these photos, and either in your head or in the glorious privacy of your own home, shout out what it is you think we're looking at. And there's not very many. It's not a test. It's just a bit of fun. So what are we looking at here? An absolutely glorious common toad. Look at that beautiful golden eye. Next one. What are we looking at here? If you're lucky, you might see one of these bounding across the downs. Remember getting some lovely views near Amberley. What's this? It's a brown hare. Next one. You might hear this with its yaffling call. One of our woodpeckers. It's a green woodpecker. How's everybody doing? It's getting a bit more tricky now with plants. Looking particularly luxuriant on a riverbank there. Everyone shouting out, Himalayan balsam. Oh no, it's an invasive species. Next one. It's butterfly. You might see this fluttering around the elms in Brighton. Do we know what it is? It's a white letter hair streak. If you look very carefully, you might see the trace of the letter W on the underwing there, which is give it away. Last one. What's this? One of my photos. It's a fly agaric, the cartoon mushroom, growing there outside a block of flats in Crawley. Now you might wonder what the point of all that was, and it's really to say that wildlife recording can be that simple. So if you remember one thing from today's talk, I'm going to come back to it a few times. We generally recommend that people use the iRecord system for recording wildlife in Sussex. There's a website and there's a mobile app, I think that's going to appear, and you can use this system to record sightings of any British wildlife that you come across, plants, animals, fungi, and yeah, all you need to put in is what you saw, where you saw it, when you saw it, and bung it into the website or ping it off through the mobile app, and that's you've submitted a wildlife record. And I'll talk a bit more about that in the end, but it can be that simple. So be encouraged to have a go, and it's free to register for an account. So that's the kind of headline message, but today I'm going to talk about a bit more than that, and I'm going to start off by introducing Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, where I work. So what is Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre? Well, the first thing to mention is that we are first and foremost a service provider. We exist to be an impartial provider of information on Sussex's biodiversity, geodiversity, and some other aspects of Sussex's natural environment. We do that by working in partnership with data users and data providers. Essentially, we work for public benefit to bring all of that information together and make it available for anybody to use it. We are not for profit, and we're hosted by the Sussex Wildlife Trust. So we do operate as a department of the Wildlife Trust. If you've had anything to do with us, you might notice that we're based at Woods Mill near Henfield at the Sussex Wildlife Trust headquarters. We have email addresses that end in sussexwt.org.uk, but our finances are ring-fenced. They're held separately, and we operate within the remit of being a local environmental record centre, and there's a network of organisations like us around the UK, and we are accredited by the Association of Local Environmental Record Centres. So you can have confidence in the service that we provide. Here's the team. We're quite a small but well-formed team. It seems that people who come to work at the Record Centre tend to stay, often for a very long time. So there's me, there's my boss, Henry Brocklebank, who used to manage the Record Centre. She's now just does 1 day a week, working on behalf of the Record Centre, representing us in various strategic partnerships and raising the profile of the services that we provide in the sort of environmental NGO sector in Sussex. There's our data officer, Helen Burgess. So she works responding to people's data requests and generating the reports that we provide to people. There's Bob Foreman, who's our biodiversity data lead. And we didn't realise when we were doing his job description that does actually make him sound like a sort of computer peripheral. But he is very technical, got a lot of technical skills, and he manages our species database, and he's also a main contact with lots of recording groups. So I'm sure a lot of people will in the sort of wildlife recording community will have come across Bob. There's Andrew Lawson, who's our GIS and spatial ecology projects lead. So Andrew's particularly good on mapping and working with all of our habitat and other kind of spatial mapping data sets. So he does a lot of project work for us, as well as managing all of our habitat data holdings. And there's Lois Mayhew, who's our biodiversity projects officer. She also handles a lot of communications on behalf of the Record Centre. So if you've ever received a copy of our e-news, that comes out from Lois, and she's very involved in supporting various projects that we deliver. And I'm going to talk about some of those later. So that's us. And I guess I'm going to talk to you a bit more about Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, but it's all part of kind of why record wildlife. And I think that question of why is perhaps worth just taking a moment for yourself. If you're out in the countryside or you're out on a walk, what would be your motivation for recording wildlife? What might make you make a note of it or put it into an app or send it off? What for you? What's the motivation? And I'm going to put up some. Again, this is not normally an audience participation bit, but I'm going to have to skip straight to the answers here. And I guess the key message here is there's a whole range of reasons why people record wildlife. And there's a whole different bunch of reasons why you might be motivated to download an app or send off a list of records somewhere. And here's some of those reasons. Some people are very motivated by keeping a list. Some people, their main motivation is photography, but it's perhaps not too much of a hassle for them to sort of send it off to other people that are interested. Some people are really drawn to this sort of traditional sort of practice of natural history, that process of observing and really appreciating the beauty and wonder of wildlife, and get drawn in that way, making detailed observations. And other people might be really motivated by getting involved with a project and a group, doing something for nature conservation or to inform a particular project. And of course, lots of people work in the ecology sector, so would be doing this for a job. And as far as Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre is concerned, any reason to record wildlife is a good reason if you're willing to share reliable data and information that you've recorded to the best of your abilities through a system where we can go and access it. So basically, whatever your reason, it's fine by us, and we'd be really happy if you could share those records with the Record Centre. Now, one thing that I always get asked about in talks about what we do is the completeness or the sort of consistency in the records that we hold. And it's really important to understand that what the Record Centre does is collate available information on wildlife records, and bring that all together into a central data set for Sussex. But there's all sorts of gaps in that data set. There's limitations. There's places where we have lots of records, and there's places where we have very few records. And part of our job, as well as making information accessible to people, part of our job is also helping people to understand the strengths and limitations of that data, so that they don't kind of assume things that they shouldn't assume from the information that we're giving them. So this is a map that my colleague Bob put together a couple of years ago, and it's a heat map based on the number of records in the Record Centre database for each 1 kilometre square in Sussex. Now, just to explain, the deep blue colours, those are the highest number of records. Then you kind of get a sort of less intense sort of reddish pinkish colour. They're the sort of middle, and then where you've got the paler yellow colour, that's where we've got the fewest number of records in those areas. So you can see there's a kind of real hodgepodge of how many records we've got in the database for different areas. this sort of area of relief, sort of cutting across Sussex, you might recognise that as the South Downs. And generally, a lot of the South Downs is fairly well recorded, but you'll see that the area down at the pointy bit near Eastbourne and over towards Brighton, that's much better recorded than the Western Downs, where you've got a lot of kind of steep wooded slopes, more difficult to access areas, and you're getting some lots of yellow squares there where we've got fewer records, and therefore less knowledge of the diversity of species that occurs in those squares. Down on the coastal plain, this other pointy bit down on the left, it's generally a mixture of kind of low yellows and middling red. But when you get down to some of the wildlife reserves on the Manhood Peninsula, you've got one square there, SZ8596, which has more than 130,000 records just from one square there. And you can see there's a mixed picture across Sussex. Some of the other squares, top left here, TQ1732, I think that's Warnham Nature Reserve near Horsham, where they've had a very very intensive program of recording there for years and years. And down on the right here, that dark blue square, which gets more than 180,000 records, that's the Panel Valley, where they do a lot of bird ringing. So they're generating hundreds of records, biological records every day, which are getting shared with Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre. And then the converse, there's a little square here over near the border with Kent, TQ7627. When we put this map together in 2019, there was 0 records. There's basically no public rights of way that traverse that square. So often with land in private ownership, we may have a few records if there's been permission from landowners to go and do surveys or things like that, but we may have few, or in this case 0 records where there is a difficulty accessing. So that's one thing to be aware of. And the other thing to be aware of is there's a real kind of variation in the number of records that we have for different taxonomic groups. So this is another chart that Bob put together. This is a couple of years ago now, but it shows you just roughly how all the records in our database break down in terms of these different groups. Probably won't be a surprise that the taxonomic group we've got the most records for by far is birds, because they are such a popular group to record, and the birders have got themselves so well organized. And then next up you've got flowering plants, and then moths and butterflies also doing very well. And then everything else gets a much smaller slice of the pie. Yeah, as you kind of get further down the list, after butterflies, I think it's lichens, then beetles, then mosses, dragonflies, bees, all of bees, ants, and sawflies and wasps, and fungi all the way down here in this little orange slice. People who came to my previous talk will know that's my favorite. But yeah, despite being a vast kingdom, very few records compared to other taxonomic groups. So that's just another thing to be aware of when you come to interrogate and use the data that we hold. Right, I better keep going. So why would you share your records? Why do we want you to share your records with Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre? Well, it's just so that we can share it with other people. We're there to provide a service. And one of the main groups of people that we share that information with is all of our partners. And these organisations all contribute funds towards our sort of core running costs. And in exchange, we provide them with regular biodiversity information updates so that they can have information on protected species, priority species, invasive species at their fingertips in their organisations. And why would they want that? Well, that kind of gets into the topic of conservation policy, which is another talk in itself. But in very high level terms, all public bodies have a duty to have regard to biodiversity. So that's one of the hooks that we use in order to kind of remind all of these partners, if they ever need reminding, but they generally don't, that this is really core. Biodiversity is really core to what they do, and they need this information in order to make good decisions and informed decisions. Right, what else do? We share it with essentially anybody who has a need for biodiversity information from Sussex can request a report from our website, and there's a page where you can do that looks like this, and we have a charging framework that applies. But if you're requesting information for personal interest or to inform a local recording project, for example, then there's no charge. And when you request one of these reports, what you get back is a PDF, and it has a cover that looks like this, detailing what the search area is that you requested from us, and it comes with a summary page with a very high level summary of the information that we've provided. But the report itself contains a whole mass of information. We've got very sort of technical, bespoke IT systems that we use to spatially interrogate all of the data that we hold and then pull it out into one of these reports that's specific to the area that you've said that you're interested in. And you get a series of maps showing habitats and sites and designated areas, and you get a series of data tables summarizing all the species records that we hold, so that you can see what's been recorded in the search area. And the report also comes with various kind of advice and information about the information that we're providing you. So it explains that the report just contains records of what we've got in the database, and if something doesn't show up in this report, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not there. It might just be that somebody hasn't recorded it. So that's what our data request reports look like, and this is kind of the main thing that we do with all your species records that you share with the Record Centre. And this is what's been happening to demand for our data request service over the last 10 years. It's just gone up and up and up. And this is the latest figures for the financial year that just ended at the end of March. And you can see the pandemic hasn't even really registered as a blip in this increasing demand for data request service. We saw demand for data requests tail off a bit in April last year when the first lockdown hit, but very quickly the ecology sector seemed to sort of rebound and continue as normal, because it's outdoor work. It can happen in a sort of COVID safe way. So we've had a really busy year in the Record Centre, responding to all these requests for data search reports. And don't know if you'll be able to see that figure there, but just in the last few years, we've seen 15% increase in the number of reports that people are requesting from Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, which, when you consider that the number of staff that we've got in the Record Centre has not gone up over that period, that's starting to be quite challenging to deal with. So we're looking at options to increase the capacity that we've got in the Record Centre at the moment. What do people use these data request reports for? Well, the information we have shows that the vast majority, almost 3/4 of these reports, are used to inform the planning application process. And there's a whole range of other reasons why people might request reports from us. So we've got a separate category for people who want to, third parties who are commenting on somebody else's planning application. That's a completely valid reason to come to us and request a data search report. The next biggest chunk is sort of conservation land management reasons, and it's great to see people using that evidence base to help them put together management plans or conservation strategies for their own land and projects. And also neighbourhood plans is an area we don't get a lot of requests for data search to support neighbourhood plans, but we're always really keen to make people aware that that is an option, because I think looking at the biodiversity evidence base really early on when you're putting together a plan for your neighbourhood or parish or local community, that information can be really helpful in terms of recognising the important biodiversity features and nature sites that you've got in the area, and the kind of reports we produce can help with that, I think. We also use the information to inform various other projects that we're doing, and we do a whole range of different projects. So I've just picked out two that we're doing at the moment. So over the last sort of year or two, we've been working really closely with the Sussex Nature Partnership, who have been developing a strategy for Sussex, a natural capital investment strategy, to try and get a higher profile for all the benefits and services that nature provides, and highlight where additional investment could help to safeguard or improve the functioning of those natural assets. And that has fed straight into developing ecological network mapping or mapping of nature recovery networks in Sussex, which we're sort of doing provisionally at the moment, with an expectation that the Environment Bill that's going through Parliament at the moment will include a duty for public bodies to develop a nature recovery strategy. So we're constantly kind of reimagining the ways that we can slice and dice the information that we've got to support our partners in making their plans and strategies, and ultimately making good decisions for community and for nature. And another project that I've been particularly excited to get involved with recently is mapping mycologically rich grasslands. This is a contract that we're doing for Natural England. You might have heard of wax-cap grasslands. Well, there's actually a whole range of different species of fungi that occur in grasslands. And if you get a kind of reasonable assemblage of them, then that can be an indicator of the grassland being really ancient and kind of special biodiversity habitat. So we've been interrogating all of the grassland fungi records that we hold in the Record Centre, and using these to map sites across Sussex which we think look like they're important for grassland fungi. So that's a couple of projects that we're doing. Our big project that we've kind of been building up for the last 3 or 4 years is the Sussex Local Wildlife Sites Initiative. And I think local wildlife sites don't tend to have that much of a profile, so I don't know if people will be aware of them. But local wildlife site is a local planning designation, so it's not statutory protection, but these sites get recognition for their biodiversity value through the planning process if they contain features of substantive nature conservation value. So you might have heard of them in Sussex because they were previously referred to as sites of nature conservation importance. If you're aware of SNCIs, then local wildlife sites are essentially the same thing, just with updated kind of name and kind of framework in which we're developing the evidence base and designating them. So because this is such a big project for the Record Centre, and we work really closely with this Local Wildlife Sites Initiative, which is also hosted by Sussex Wildlife Trust, I'm just going to mention a few things about that. There are over 600 local wildlife sites in Sussex, and they cover over 5% of the land area of Sussex. So these are an important network of sites which contain, well, as I said on my previous slide, features of substantive nature conservation importance. So they're basically places that are really nice for wildlife. And it's this local wildlife site system which gives these sites some recognition through the planning process, but also with the people that own them, so that they can be managed sympathetically for wildlife. And what the Local Wildlife Sites Initiative is aiming to do is to ensure there's an up-to-date evidence base for this network of sites, so that they can be represented accurately in local plans. They can be given due consideration in the planning and development process, and ultimately this initiative, being hosted by Sussex Wildlife Trust, has the aim of getting these sites into positive conservation management. So we want good outcomes for biodiversity on these sites. What's that got to do with Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre? Well, the initiative employs a ecological surveyor who sits with our team, or well, when we're in the office, he sits in our team. We're all sitting in our respective homes at the moment. And his job is to go out and do surveys of these sites, so we get up-to-date evidence of the habitats and species that are there. And that process works sort of hand in glove with the Record Centre, because he also uses that evidence base that we have at the Record Centre to check what species have previously been recorded on the site, so he knows what he's perhaps going out to look for when he goes out to do a survey. And his reports include a comprehensive desk study highlighting any kind of species that the records that the Record Centre holds highlight as being important. So that's local wildlife sites, and that's another, if you're contributing records to the Record Centre, then you're potentially adding to that evidence base for that network of local sites in Sussex. And while we're talking about locally designated sites, it would be remiss of me not to mention marine sites of nature conservation importance. And we've worked closely with Sussex IFCA to develop an interactive map of Sussex's marine environment, which you can find on their website. And if you click on one of these stars, these are all marine sites of nature conservation importance. And there's information about them on the website, including some lovely illustrations of their biodiversity features, like the Bracklesham bulls here. So if you're interested in you know, the sort of natural environment off Sussex's coast, what's under the sea, then do go and check out this map, because there's quite a lot of different sources of information on there. And we also host the Sussex Geodiversity Partnership, and we manage their website for them, where you can find information on local geological sites. And if you go onto the Geodiversity Sussex website, then you can find the map with all the local geological site information on it. And if you click on any of these dots, you'll get information up about those, and you might find some near where you live or whatever. So those just another couple of things that the Record Centre does. Right, how are we getting on? How are we doing for time? So that's a lot of information, but my hope is with this talk that I think everyone has a different kind of route or a different interest that pulls them into the world of biological recording. So my hope is that something will kind of catch your interest or speak to your own personal motivation, and there's various kind of avenues that you can follow this up. So moving on to how to record wildlife. Well, this definitely could be a whole series of talks in itself. When you think about how complex and sometimes cryptic and evasive nature can be, the process of observing it and identifying it is different for, you know, all different kinds of organisms. But in very simplistic terms, what makes a biological record is a person observing something and saying what they saw, so a species name, where they saw it, ideally a name of that place and a grid reference, and when they saw it. And if you've got those bits of information, then those are the components of a biological record. It could be a blackbird in your back garden, it could be a pigeon in the park, but you know, it can be that simple, or you can kind of take it as far as you want, and it can get a lot more complicated with microscopes and telescopes and all things like that. But the reason we recommend iRecord website is because if you create an account and go onto the enter a casual record page, then you don't even need to remember what bits of information you need to provide for a record, because it will prompt you for them. So here's a record that I put in last autumn, no, the autumn before, for a blackening waxcap, Hygrocybe conica. So it's prompted me for all these bits of information here. We've got the date, we've got my name, we've got the species, and it asks you for, it gives you the option to include a bit more information, which I haven't done. And the thing with iRecord is you can also upload a photo. If you've got a photo of the organism that shows its identification features, you can upload that with your observation, and it just helps the people who are reviewing all of this information to verify it and confirm that yes, Claire did see a blackening waxcap. And the nice thing about iRecord is it also makes specifying where you were really easy, because you can use this map feature to navigate to exactly where you were. In this example, I was in the middle of a churchyard, and it will pull out the grid reference for you. And that's really useful information for us, because that really helps to pinpoint the record. When you're working with records that are from some time ago, say 10 or 20 years ago, people didn't have smartphones, they didn't have GPSs. So people were working with their Ordnance Survey maps and having to read grid references off there. So older records quite often have less precise grid references that perhaps relate to the 1 kilometre square or 100 metre square. But nowadays with smartphones and GPSs, we can get really accurate grid references on where things were, and that is useful when you think about how our data request reporting system works. It means you can pull out with more confidence records that were definitely on this site or in this area. So there we go. That's what iRecord looks like, and that's the sort of minimum information that you need to put in to submit a record. And that particular record has now been used in that mapping project I was talking about just now, mapping waxcap grasslands. And you can do a very similar thing on the iRecord app on your smartphone, if you've got one. If you're recording birds, BirdTrack's also a really good system that we recommend for bird recording, that's developed by the British Trust for Ornithology and a range of partners. So that's another one that we recommend. And on the subject of other wildlife recording schemes, websites and apps, I'm sure a lot of you will be aware that there are a whole range of different ones to choose from, different ones that you might have experience using. They all have their strengths and limitations. So iRecord is the one that we recommend for general recording, because you can use it for any British wildlife, and the data flow works nicely to the national recording schemes, but also to local record centres. And BirdTrack as well, we recommend. The other ones, if there's something else that you're using and you're not sure if we're getting the data or where it's going, feel free to just get in touch with us and say, I'm using such and such an app. How can I share my records with Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, and we can speak to you about whatever system it is that you're using or you've got questions about. Now, another thing that I say is we can work with biological records however they come. So these are just some examples of data sets that we've received in Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre. But I must say that when I took receipt of all of these lever arch files, I was extremely relieved when I subsequently contacted the database manager at Sussex Ornithological Society, and he confirmed that all of these records were already in the database and had been shared with them, because the drawback of receiving records in sort of different formats, non-computerized formats, is it can be a huge amount of time and effort to transcribe these and digitize them, and it really helps get your records to the top of the pile if you submit them to us in a digital way, which might be via iRecord, or it might be via a spreadsheet by email or something. But while we're on the subject of ways records are submitted, I think this is a really nice example. It's from a couple of years ago now, but the guy in the picture is Peter Hodge, who is the Sussex County Recorder for beetles. And since the 1970s, he has been keeping records of beetles that he's observed in Sussex in this series of notebooks that you can see in the photo there. Now, over a period of 10 years, we worked with Peter to get these records digitized with a sequence of sort of generations of data entry volunteers, and in the last year we got some funding for Natural England, which enabled us to put some staff time into getting this project over the finish line. And those 14 notebooks, there are 14 notebooks. There's not 14 in the picture there, but there were 14. And in them, they contain 43 years worth of data. And when we got all of that into a database, we found that added up to 43,000 records of 2,270 different species. So that's really an incredible example of the contribution that just one person can make to our knowledge of Sussex wildlife. Because what we know, beetles are such important signifiers of habitat and habitat quality. The information that this gives us about Sussex wildlife is just kind of immeasurable, and it's all thanks to one person and his love of beetles and his willingness to look in some fairly unusual locations there as well, as you can see in the list. So as you can imagine, this was such a massive project. We were very happy when we got to the end of it, so we had a cake, a tribute to the rose chafer there, a Lewis speciality. Right, so that's all the different kind of formats that we're willing to work with, but it really helps us if you can use iRecord. And what we do when we get all of this, these biological records from you, is we import it all into one very big database full of species records. We're on well over 8 million individual species records in the database now, and we work with a network of local experts, county recorders and iRecord verifiers to get all of that species data verified, so that we know the records that we can have confidence in and use in our services. So once we've got it all into our database, that's what we output to use in the partner updates. So all that list of partners that I showed you at the beginning, they get to use all of that information, and that's what we output through our data request service as well. And we're also happy to exchange records with national recording schemes. So if someone's doing a atlas on stoneflies or something, we're very happy for them to come to Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, and we will give them a copy of all of the stonefly records that we hold, to help them if they're assembling a national data set. And quite often from those national recording schemes, data will also be shared with the NBN Atlas, which is a UK online database for sharing biological records. But for various reasons, we don't currently share much data via the NBN Atlas, because we're keen to focus on providing a local biodiversity data information service, and we're keen for people to be signposted to the Record Centre for access to the latest available information. Yeah, so that's what we do with it all. And then my favourite bit of the talk, wildlife recording in Sussex. This is what makes my job such a pleasure, is just the incredible network of people that there are in Sussex, and groups passionate about recording wildlife. Every day there will be people out and about in the Sussex countryside and towns and villages, observing and recording wildlife, with the motivation to share that, to help add to our sort of collective understanding of Sussex wildlife. And I think this is the full set of groups. So I haven't got time to talk to you about all of them and how brilliant they are, but you can find on the Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre website a list of them all, and links to their websites and other pages. But just what we try to do also on our website, we have a regular Species of the Month feature, and we try to use this to showcase these groups, and also highlight some of the species that they might be focusing on, or that they know are under recorded, and try and give these species a moment in the spotlight, and give you enough information to know, right, okay, this is what I need to go out and look for these, and this is how I tell these species apart. Some sort of ID tips and information. So there's a whole kind of back catalogue of these now that you can find on the website. So please do go and check them out. I'm just gonna have a sip of water. And the sort of species groups are really helpful to us in providing that information. And just to pick out, I don't have favourites, but just to pick out a few things that have been going on recently. Sussex Ornithological Society, that's probably Sussex's biggest wildlife recording society. It produces this brilliant bird report every year and organises a whole array of recording initiatives and projects and things. But also just to highlight, they really got with the times during the lockdown, and Sussex Ornithological Society have got their own YouTube channel, and they've been working with the Sussex Wildlife Trust webinar series to put out a whole range of different talks and things. So there's loads of information there that you can access during this weird period while all the normal things aren't happening. Sussex Mammal Group. Now, we worked with them a couple of years ago to develop an online atlas to Sussex mammals. Now, you might think, because mammals tend to be one of the groups that we can recognise, so people recognise rabbits and foxes and badgers and hedgehogs, you might think that we'd have loads of records of mammals, but actually we often don't have that many records of mammals. So this is just a clip of what the distribution map looks like for stoats. So no one's ever sent us a record of a stoat from near East Hoathly or around Pevensey or north of Crowborough. So if you do see mammals while you're out and about, then that could be really valuable information to share with the Record Centre to help add to our knowledge of the distribution of these species where they're occurring. And there's the link to access the Sussex Mammal Group Atlas. Sussex Botanical Recording Society. I give a plug there for the Flora of Sussex, which when I do these talks at home, I can handily wheel away to my bookcase and demonstrate just how monumental this piece of work is. I can't wheel forward and hold a book, right? look at that. It's massive. There's so much information in this book, and if you're interested in plants, and particularly plants in Sussex, it's such a valuable resource because it's full of distribution maps. Ooh, I'm not going to do this again. I don't think this works very well. But if you can see that, it's full of distribution maps showing you where plants occur in Sussex. So it's a really useful tool. If you've seen a plant and you're thinking, oh, I think it might be this, you can have a look in the atlas and think, oh yeah, well that has been recorded round here, so it might give you a bit more confidence when you're getting things right. Another really nice thing that Sussex Botanical Recording Society did last year during the lockdown, well, no, not during the lockdown, during the recording season, was they did this Plant of the Week feature. So if you go onto their website, then there's information about all these different kind of plants, which again, with really useful information and ID tips if you want to get out and get into plants this season. Sussex Moth Group website. This is my colleague Bob's sort of brainchild, and there's fantastic wealth of information about moths that occur in Sussex, and with fabulous photos and things on this website, so well worth checking out if you're interested in moths. And you can also find out what the golden cup of mothing glory is. They've been having a bit of fun as a recording group during the pandemic. And Sussex Fungus Group, which is the one that I'm most involved in, they've just recently updated their website as well with information on projects they've been getting up to, and they've got an active email group which is keeping people connected while we're all sort of stuck at home and not able to go out on recording group expeditions. So that's just a few of the recording groups. What we normally do, and we did just squeeze one in February 2020, before the pandemic really kicked off. What we normally do is all get together in a big hall. I don't know when we're going to be able to do that again, but that's just to give you a sense of this sort of size of the community that there is out there involved in all of this stuff. And we also produce this Adastra publication every year, which is a review of wildlife recording in Sussex. So the 2020 edition is going to be an absolutely bumper edition because everyone got so excited about getting out and doing wildlife recording last year because there wasn't a lot else to do. It's such a bumper edition. It's taking us a little bit longer to put together than it normally does, but it should be done soon, and we will get it to you, the 2020 edition, as soon as we can. And you can read those on our website, and they're full of fantastic articles about wildlife in Sussex and what all these recording groups have been doing, and various different sites and things. So well worth checking out. And if all of that sounded a bit too mainstream for you, then there's a whole range of different taxonomic recording schemes which work as national recording schemes. And if you go onto the Biological Record Centre website, you can find a list from the Ecological Society to the Dipterists Forum, groups to record anything and everything, pretty much, whatever takes your fancy. And you can find information about them online, and nowadays quite a lot of them have Facebook groups and other social media accounts, so that you can get involved with them. And I've really just talked about recording species today, because I had to draw the line somewhere, but there are a whole load of other ecological survey initiatives that you can get involved with, and a couple of nice ones that are potentially relevant if you're thinking about how you can improve information and evidence on perhaps where you live or your community, is the Ancient Tree Inventory, which is run by the Woodland Trust. And there's also the Great British Hedgerow Survey, which is run by the People's Trust for Endangered Species. So these are very well organised schemes that anyone can get involved with, and help add to the evidence base about nature in Sussex and elsewhere. These are UK initiatives. And that is about it, I think. If this sounded like the sort of stuff you're interested in, then do sign up for our Sussex Biological Recording News. It's an occasional e-newsletter that the Record Centre sends out. And you can, if you go onto the Record Centre homepage, there's a box that looks like this where you can subscribe to our e-news. Comes out usually every sort of 2 or 3 months. We don't bombard you with emails all the time. And there's some other ideas. Set yourself up with an iRecord account, definitely. You can find information about all of those local groups on our website. And you can find information about national recording schemes and societies on the Biological Record Centre website. And there's also an organisation called the National Biodiversity Network that brings all of these kind of recording type organisations together. And if you're really interested in this sort of sector, then they have an e-news as well that you can sign up to. So just a few ideas there. I'm just going to mention, if you're wondering, what was that site that she mentioned? I should definitely sign up with that iRecord, and there's an app. And just to say, you'll have got the sense that the Record Centre is a fairly small team doing, I've probably given the impression, quite a lot of work. So we are really happy for people to get in touch with us with questions about wildlife recording, and particularly any kind of technical queries about sharing records, and if you're interested in getting a data request from us. But we don't have the capacity to respond to identification queries and that sorts of thing. So I'm just going to give a shout out to my colleagues who work at the Sussex Wildlife Trust, Charlotte, who runs Wildcall, because they are really happy to respond to any kind of requests for wildlife advice or information, including identification queries, and if you want more information about sort of survey initiatives and or something going on with wildlife that you're concerned about, these are the people to get in touch with. And that's it. Thanks for listening.
All right, sorry, I was ended a bit quick there. Sorry, I was just getting my notes together. Thank you, Claire. That's great. It's nice to know what you do all day. I had no idea. So now there's a load of questions. There's about 40 odd questions down there. We don't have time to go through them all, but I'll try to bunch them together. So you've got time for some questions, Claire?
Yeah.
I tried to do the most popular ones, but there's a lot of questions there. So what I'll do, I'll pass those on to Claire after the webinar, so you can answer those. But now here's one here from, well, there's one from Viv. Viv says, how far back does the Record Centre data go? And just linked to that, Caroline says, how recent does data need to be to submit it to you?
Okay, both really good questions. I feel like I should know the answer to Viv's question. I don't, but the records can go back as far as observations of wildlife that can be pinned down to exactly what was seen when, we can hold in our database. So that, I'm sure we've got records that go back 100 years odd from perhaps botanical recorders who were collecting specimens, or people. There's a guy called Marcus Oldfield who's a volunteer at the Booth Museum who's digitized a lot of records from species collections held at the Booth Museum. So we hold historic data as well as recent data. And in terms of how recent information has to be, well, the official advice from the Chartered Institute for Ecology and Environmental Management is that when ecologists are looking at doing a desk-based study, looking at information that exists, they shouldn't use a cutoff. So for certain species groups, if you're thinking about fungi or mosses, surveys for them happen very infrequently, and populations tend to be very stable. So you might have a record of a moth from 30 years ago, hasn't been recorded again in the last 30 years. But if you were to go back, it's probably still there. So that record is still valuable and it's still useful and telling you something. But typically, sort of the last 10 years is considered sort of recent information. But you know, we're happy. It's useful to have the information again every year because it tells you that things are still there.
Jess wants to know who made the cake. Who made the beetle cake?
I made the cake with my friend Sarah helped me.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for that, Claire. It's an easy one then. Here's one here. Now, Jenny says, do you really want records of everyday species? Surely you want unusual sightings.
Okay, well, this again is a really good question. And when you think about the services that the Record Centre provides, those data searches that we give people and the information that we provide to, say, planning authorities, what they're particularly interested in is records of protected species, priority species, invasive species. So records of those will get used more in that context. But we also use records for different projects that we might be doing with recording groups. So if a recording group is doing an atlas project, for example, and they want to understand the distribution of species in Sussex, then they definitely want records of common species, because you might be the only person that bothered to send in a record of a rabbit from the 1 kilometre square where you live, and that helps to demonstrate the distribution of common species. And also, if you're getting involved in initiatives which are more about monitoring species from year to year, then the occurrence of common species can also be really useful in that context to give an indication of population trends and how things are doing over time, because something that's common now might not be common in 5 years' time, or something, you know, like house sparrows might once have been very common but less common now. So yeah, we're happy to accept all records, especially if you put them in via iRecord, because it makes it much easier for us to process them and get them into our database. And our database is essentially limitless. It can hold as many records as people are willing to share with us.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Now there's a few people asking this question. I'll try and sort of paraphrase it. So Helen, David and Peter, if I report a rare breeding bird, for example, do you make this information public?
Right, okay. So birds, all the bird data, we have an agreement with Sussex Ornithological Society that they manage the master database for bird records in Sussex. And they have a schedule which identifies which species or what particular types of records of particular species, say breeding records, should be treated as sensitive or confidential. So we do have systems for making sure that the information that's released to people and made accessible is managed. So in certain examples, there are some species of birds that the Sussex Ornithological Society would treat as completely confidential, and what they give us is information on where there are confidential records, and our reports include a line saying, in your search area there are 3 confidential records of birds, and if you want more information, then you should go to Sussex Ornithological Society, and then Sussex Ornithological Society would decide if those people have a need to know about those confidential records in that area. Other species, there's a couple of species that we treat as entirely otters, for example, because they're extremely scarce, very rarely recorded in Sussex, but they're also potentially under threat of persecution. So we treat those as completely confidential. And we also don't report on wood whites, I think. No, wood whites wood-white butterflies, because they're also particularly scarce and their habitat is quite vulnerable. We do report on those, but we blur the records to, I think, 1 kilometre or 2 kilometre resolution, so we don't give people too precise information about where they are.
Okay, thank you. And there's a lot of nice comments here. I'll pass these on to Claire later on. So thank you for the webinar. A lot of people who are going to be downloading iRecord, it seems, and starting to record, so that's great. So we have one final question. It's from Anne. She says, what can I do if I find something like a strange fungi or a strange insect? I don't know what it is. So if you see something, not sure what it is, how can you record it?
Right, okay. You've got a range of different options. So as well as iRecord, there's a completely different system called iSpot, which is run by the Open University, which is specifically designed for sharing photos of things you've spotted and you don't know what they are, and people will come along and tell you what they think it is. You could send it to Wildcall. I know Charlotte does get a few queries from people who've spotted something and they're not sure what it is. Or if you've got an idea what it is, so you think it's a fly or a bird, quite a lot of those local recording groups that I talked about have their own forums, whether it's on Facebook or email or sightings pages, where you can send people in and connect with a local community of people who are interested in those types of organisms and who can help you identify it or understand what the identification features are. So a range of options there.
Okay, well, thank you, Claire. I'm going to